I want to start by introducing our panel, Mr. Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Ms. Shailene Woodley. Multiple Academy Award winner Oliver Stone. And joining us live from maybe Russia, Mr. Edward Snowden. So my first question is for Ed. How's the weather there?
You know, it's much better than I expected. The wintertime is pretty harsh, but the summer is really nice. It's coming to an end now, but...
Good. Well, I wanted to ask... I'm sorry, I forgot about the delay.
We've got like a 2-second delay because of the internet connection.
Right,
there. But yeah, I was going to say, as somebody who came up in the whole CIA, NSA background, whenever you picture Russia in the back of your head, it's this frozen, icy wasteland. And it's not always like that.
Is it sweater weather?
Not yet, actually. You can still get by with a hoodie.
I wanted to ask you, just for starters, you have spoken to documentarians, you have spoken to journalists about your story, but this is the first time that you have seen an actor portray you and seen situations from your life, some of them very personal in nature, dramatized. How did it feel to see that? How did it feel to see that dramatization?
You know, that's one of those things, particularly for a very private person, that's never going to feel normal. But the amount of care that went into it, both from the perspective of the crew and the director, and of course the talent, the work that Joe did, is reassuring, because even if it's not you, right? It's never going to be you. You're not going to recognize yourself. You recognize that the story is close to yours. It represents sort of what you believe in, your values, and hey, it was close enough that my family liked it, so I can say I'm happy with that.
Did you smuggle that data outside in a Rubik's Cube?
No, they actually came to one of the premieres. Oh, I'm sorry, you're talking about the actual film's heist.
Yes.
On that one, I can say that Mr. Stone mentioned previously in one of the showings that was something that was put in for the film, but only because of the public record, there's no strict confirmation or denial, which I'm not going to make tonight.
I see.
But what I will say is that I did give everyone in my office Rubik's Cubes as a gift, so they were floating around and coming in and out all the time.
Nice. My next question is for Oliver. Can you describe your reaction to hearing Edward Snowden's story for the first time? How did it strike you, and what about it made you think that you had to tell this story?
It wasn't that simple. It was non-sequential. It was bits, pieces, like a digitization of his life. I think it took quite a few visits, and Kieran and I, Fitzgerald, my co-writer, we sat with him and we had lunches and we had long discussions. You'd discuss things and I'd look at you and say, well, can you say that again? Some of that stuff was complex. And we'd come back another time and we'd ask you the same questions. It took time to really absorb this stuff. I can understand why the public has sometimes, it's very hard to, at first you get the surface and then you got to go beneath it, and it takes time.
You visited Ed, didn't you, for research purposes?
Say it.
You visited Edward Snowden for research, didn't you?
I think I was there 9 times at the end of the day, by the time it was over. But Ed incrementally trusted us, and more, and there's another side of this thing. It's not just about what happened. It's about relationships. He was not a very shy person, and I think we probed him on what his relationship was with Lindsay Mills, and I think that was a big surprise, because to me, that was dramatic fare. Otherwise, you'd have a hard, cold movie, which could almost look like a documentary, feel like one. You need a relationship, and frankly, there was one there in plain sight, but the press had not been very kind. I hope you don't mind Ed my saying this, but they had not been very kind to Lindsay, and I could see that difference when after I met her and talked to him.
Ed, do you agree with that? Do you think the press wasn't kind to Lindsay? They certainly weren't to you.
I think there's a natural incentive for media, particularly in the wake of a controversial story, if a beautiful woman is involved, to kind of reduce her only to that, to make her transparent and not really quite a person, but more of an ornament. Whereas if this is a woman who's been with someone for more than 10 years, around the world, different postings, living in the kind of life where you have to deal with these things, where somebody's disappearing, you don't know where they're going. And on top of this, they have so much depth to themselves. And she, of course, actually shared some of this on the internet. She had a footprint. She had photographs of herself that were out there, which is one of the ways they were able to sort of change perception of her into just, this woman in photographs. That isn't quite fair. I think it's natural, and we see it a lot, even with people who are extremely accomplished. So if it's a normal person who doesn't have much of a voice, who doesn't have much clout, it's all too easy to be kind of buried under a narrative that's not really quite true.
Shailene, what do you think of that?
I think that's beautifully put, and exactly true what Ed just said. It's easy for the media to spin a story and to portray a certain narrative. And something that fascinated me about this screenplay to begin with was a lot of us know who Edward Snowden is, or we thought we knew who he was. And a lot of people have a lot of strong judgments about Edward Snowden. But I feel like until this movie, none of us actually knew the story of Ed the human. We knew the story that mainstream media had put out about him. We knew the story that the government had released, but we didn't know his story. And I think that just adds to what Ed was saying just now with Lindsay and with Ed himself as well, and how easy it is as a society to base our judgments off of a certain perspective that's not only not our own perspective, but the perspective that exists outside of the base and the core of the issue, or the base and the core of the person in this case.
Even though I was working on a biography of Oliver for many, many years, he wouldn't let me read the script of Snowden until I came onto the set last year in Washington. Information with Oliver is on a need-to-know basis. I can't say that I blame him. And I was surprised by the extent to which it is a love story. Like, the love story is what kind of anchors it. Can you talk a little bit about portraying these two characters, and have you played real characters before? What is the responsibility of the actor to playing a person who is not only a real person but is alive and is going to see this movie?
Well, it gives you a lot to go on. When you're playing a fictitious character, you can't listen to them talk, you can't see how they stand or sit, or you have to kind of make a lot of that up. And when you're playing someone real, especially someone real and current, and where there's video footage and interviews that people have seen all around the world, then you're sort of. I like to take it as, well, this can be my inspiration,
Right.
Is there a responsibility? Yeah, there really is, and I mean, we talked about it for just a second. I hadn't had a chance to tell you, Ed. I'm pointing to the monitor down here because he's on there too. I can point up there. But we had our premiere last night here in New York, and Ed's mom and dad came, and I had not had a chance to meet them before, and I don't know if I've ever had as fulfilling an experience as an actor of feedback as that, because as an actor you're always sort of like, well, how was it? You want approval from your director, you want approval from your audience, you want hopefully it'll get good reviews or it'll get good box office or whatever, but But when you play a real person, and then their real mother and father come up to you and say thanks, and say, I saw my son and what you were doing, and thank you for doing this. They thanked me and said, I know this might attract criticism, and I want it. You know, his dad really made a point of looking me in the eye and saying thanks. And I've never experienced anything like that as an actor, that kind of positive feedback.
Don't
And
forget two grandmothers.
it really, you're right. Two grandmothers as well, and
The whole clan.
and a stepmom as well.
Stepmom,
that was really special.
They forgive you, Ed. Don't worry. We covered all the bases.
When I was at Oliver's offices going through his files for this book, none of them classified, so don't worry. I heard the two of you rehearsing. Right. I heard the two of you rehearsing an argument, one of the arguments in the movie. I didn't know you were in the office. All I knew was two people were having an argument that was so unbelievably emotional and loud that it was making the walls rattle 20 feet away. Can you talk a little bit about the experience of being an actor and being inside a scene of that kind of extreme emotion? What does it physically feel like? And do you leave it on the set after you go home for the end of the day?
Well, I think it depends on the scenario and the movie that you're doing. And most of the time, I am the kind of actor who does leave it the second that the camera stops rolling. If it's a really deeply emotional scene, sometimes it takes a while to sort of get your whereabouts back. But again, it's sort of dependent on the scenario. The scene that we did where Ed and Lindsay were fighting in Japan, I remember being really excited to do that scene in a way, because as an actor, I always find really dramatic, emotional scenes a challenge, but I find that challenge really like an opportunity to exercise the level of anger that you don't necessarily always elicit on a daily basis. Especially if you're going into something and you're not building. That scene was singular in the sense that it didn't start off, it started off charged, and then you had to build. And I find those, I don't know what your experience is like, but I always find those really fun in a way to do, because they are challenging to get yourself into that emotional state naturally and truthfully.
Yeah. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean by fun, in that it's
I mean, it's
I love
like,
acting.
fun.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel fun at the time exactly.
Yeah.
But it's tiring, because also when you have a fight like that in real life, it lasts for as long as it lasts. But when you're shooting a scene where you're fighting like that, you're fighting like that for 12 hours. And
Right.
and that's one of the biggest challenges, is how to keep bringing it back. And like, okay, we got it. Now they're going to shoot it from 4 more angles.
Yeah.
And but that's movie acting. It's different than theater acting, and it's a challenge. But it's also, there's something, I love it.
Ed, are you able to watch a scene like that and not kind of halfway cover your eyes?
I mean, what do you say to how does any human respond to a scene that shows you basically as the world's worst boyfriend? I mean, there's really not much more to say than that. But those things happen in every relationship. I think everybody struggles, particularly when you're in tense situations. When you're far from home, you're in a place where you don't speak the language. A lot of times, you only have each other. But at the end of the day, I'd say it's not entirely unfair. Because I like to think I was a little bit better than that for most of the quiet periods, but there was real tension, and there was a real strain. There was a real cost on the relationship to holding secrets, things that you couldn't tell each other. And it really is true that I didn't tell her. She didn't know. When she saw the same report everyone else saw in June 2013 that said, NSA leaker revealed, that was the first she had heard about it. the fact that she actually said she understood and forgave me, and then came to be with me, is something I'll never be able to pay back. She is far, far stronger than I am.
I wanted to follow up on that with a question for you and for Oliver, and I'd like you, Ed, to answer first. What sort of a person did you expect to meet when Oliver Stone walked into the room? And what sort of person did you actually meet? And Oliver, I'd like you to answer the same question when Ed is done.
You know, I've never been much of a Hollywood type. I'm not really a film guy. I'm sort of a shut-in computer type, a little bit of an indoor cat. So I can tell you every, ridiculous meme on the internet, but I've never actually watched Doctor Strangelove, which people still criticize me for. So Oliver had a little bit of a blank slate. I knew his reputation, but he had room to work. And the thing that struck me about Oliver is how consumed he is by a project. He never stops thinking, even when he's having a conversation with you about a particular point, or how he sees something in his head, or how he conceptualizes something. He doesn't always make eye contact because he's lost in his mind in this pursuit of a vision that's honestly, it's a little bit infectious.
Oliver, what were your impressions of Ed? What about him surprised you?
I think he was wary. I think he was, and I was wary of the project too. It's not, movies should not chase the news. It's true that things change quickly. It's not a wise choice, so I think it took some doing, some sense that, first of all, would he really be cooperative? Would he really tell us anything? That's a big factor. He was scared of it a bit. I think at some point he realized that a movie was going to get made on his life by a television show, or that he'd be the villain. And so I don't know his thinking in that. But over a period of 5 months, 4 months, from January to June, we made an agreement to go ahead on a realistic basis. And that was when I think it became gradual trust. He was what he was, and I think Ed has been very honest from the beginning. He hasn't changed that much, except maybe a little more relaxed now. But still, he presented who he was to the world, very articulate, very resolute young man at 29 years old to do what he did to me. I've never had that kind of consciousness to do it. My only other example of it would have been Ron Kovic, who was paralyzed in Vietnam, who came back from that war and felt very strongly about it and put his life on the line. But this is a rare instance. Young people don't tend to do that. They tend to think along with the group.
Right. For Shailene and Joe, what is your relationship to Oliver Stone's films? Were you familiar with him? How familiar were you with his movies before you started on this production?
Yeah, I think probably the first one I ever saw was Natural Born Killers, actually, and then of course I went back and saw Platoon and Wall Street and Salvador and JFK and Born on the 4th of July, and all these great movies, Any Given Sunday, as well as W and World Trade Center, and so in the 90s there, when I was a teenager, and I brought it up first. I remember watching Natural Born Killers over and over and over again, and just saying, like, you can do this with a movie, and just being so inspired by that. It was really an exciting honor to get a call from Oliver, for sure.
What was your first Oliver Stone film? Do you remember?
Similarly to Ed, I didn't really grow up with movies, watching a lot of movies, and I still haven't seen many movies. I had seen Born on the 4th of July because I was working with a director, and before we started production on that movie, it was The Fault in Our Stars. before we started production on that movie, he said, we're going to do a movie night, and I'm showing you my all-time favorite movie. You're going to come over, and we're all going to have dinner as a cast, and we're going to watch Born on the 4th of July. I was with Josh Boone. So that was the first Oliver Stone film that I had seen. But I was a big fan of Oliver's series, The Untold History of the United States, which, yeah, if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. I found it really interesting and really informational and moving.
Oliver, can you talk a little bit more about this film in relation to your other work? Are there any similarities that you see? You mentioned Born on the 4th of July as one of them. But I also thought while watching it of JFK and Nixon because of the fascination with the national security state and the effect that it has on America's sense of itself and also how it projects its power overseas.
Well, the national security state is a big issue for everyone in this room. Global security state. But from the point of view of character, I like characters who change or undergo tremendous difficulty, adversity, and either keep their character or change it. It depends on the circumstance. But it's always comes back to a drama. Comes back to a persons. That fascinates me. People make this thing go. I mean, as much scientific technology as can be in a movie as there is in this one. It comes down to the faces or looking at the computers. And unless you feel what Joe is feeling or Shailene is feeling, you're not going to follow the computer story. Very important, I think. By the way, can you see the audience, Ed? Because I want to point out that Tom Drake is here, who's a generational father to your situation. Very important. Very important role in this thing. But Tom taught Ed all the things not to do, which was to go legally into the system and complain.
Ed, can you hear us?
I could say a little bit about that real quick. There are a number of individuals inside the NSA and other branches of government, particularly in the NSA, such as Tom Drake, Bill Binney, Kirk Wiebe, Ed Loomis, and many others, who did everything right as far as what the government says you're supposed to do to raise awareness about these kind of wrongdoings. And the government treated them very, very poorly. Thomas Drake, he was a senior executive, one of the highest sort of levels of seniority you can attain within the National Security Agency. They actually have a special pay grade for these people called the Senior Executive Series or Senior Intelligence Series, as opposed to how everybody else gets paid, which is on a government scale sort of salary. It's called GS. But once he stood up and said, hey, I think these programs, this mass surveillance, exactly the kind of thing that we're discussing in the film, is violating the Constitution. It's violating everyone's rights. You can't do this. There's no law authorizing this. And even if there were, these kind of activities are unconstitutional, meaning you literally don't have the authority to pass a law without first amending the Constitution, because our Fourth Amendment prohibits these kind of unreasonable search and seizures, meaning roughly you can't spy on everybody in the country without showing a court or a judge or somebody that you have some reason to suspect that they're involved in criminal activity. But they did this. They stood up, they self-nominated, they went to higher officials, they went to the top lawyers in the National Security Agency, and people don't know this. It wasn't covered by the media very well. It was covered in a couple elite publications, where they have a sort of deeper concern, but it didn't have the impact because there was no pressure. They couldn't prove their claims publicly, and in fact, it would be illegal to try. And eventually, Thomas Drake, they brought an incredible amount of charges against him. They destroyed his career, they took his family, they took his home. Bill Binney, one of the other individuals, they came in, federal agents, to his house while he was naked in the shower with guns drawn. And it's important to remember that where that started out, how they got there. One of the common criticisms that was brought against me was they said, well, I didn't go to the director of the NSA. and say, hey, you should fix this, even though, I was much lower on the totem pole than Thomas Drake in the audience here tonight, who gave everything to try to make this happen. But this did happen, and we have the reactions of government officials on camera in interviews who have said this, and if I may, I'm not sure this will work, but I'd like to share this with you. When Thomas Drake came forward and said, this is a problem, these same programs that I was trying to reveal in 2013, he was revealing a decade earlier, this is how they responded.
He came to me, someone who was not read into the program, and told me that we were running amok, essentially, and violating the Constitution. There's no doubt in my mind I would have told him, go talk to your management, don't bother me with this. I mean, the minute he said, if he did say, you're using this to violate the Constitution, I probably would have stopped the conversation at that point, quite frankly. So, I mean, if that's what he said, then anything after that I probably wasn't listening to anyway.
If I can just summarize why that matters. Without Thomas Drake, without Bill Binney, without all of these other people, there could not have been an Edward Snowden. I get a lot of accolades, I get a lot of acknowledgement for what I did, but it's really a continuation of a much larger story, and I'm only a very small part. So thank you, Thomas Drake.
Ed, I want to follow up on that by asking you, and this is not going to be the first time you've heard this, notwithstanding all of the abuses that are depicted in this film, there are still people who would hear this story, hear your story, read about your story, and respond, well, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. If you aren't doing anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. What would you say to someone who said that?
One of the most important things, and I think we all have a duty, sort of collectively in society to remember this, is to think about when we're being manipulated, when we're being sort of directed to think a certain way and accept a certain argument reflexively without actually tackling it. The common argument that we have, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to fear. The origins of that are literally Nazi propaganda. This is not to equate the actions of our current government to the Nazis, of course, but that is literally the origin of that quote. It's from their Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. So when we hear modern politicians, when we hear modern people repeating that reflexively, without confronting its origins, without confronting what it really says, I think that's harmful. And if we actually think about it, it doesn't really make sense. Because privacy isn't about something to hide. Privacy is about something to protect. And that's who you are. That's what you believe in. That's who you want to become. Privacy is the right to the self. Privacy is what gives you the ability to share with the world who you are on your own terms, for them to understand what you're trying to be, and to protect for yourself the parts of you that you're not sure about, that you're still experimenting with. If we don't have privacy, what we're losing is the ability to make mistakes. We're losing the ability to be ourselves. Privacy is the fountainhead of all other rights. Freedom of speech doesn't have a lot of meaning if you can't have a quiet space, a space within yourself, within your mind, within the community of your friends, within your home, to decide what it is that you actually want to say. Freedom of religion doesn't mean that much if you can't figure out what you actually believe without being influenced by the criticisms and sort of outside direction and peer pressure of others. And it goes on and on and on. Privacy is baked into our language, our core concepts of government itself in every way. It's why we call it private property. Without privacy, you don't have anything for yourself. So when people say that to me, I say back, arguing that you don't care about privacy because you have nothing to hide is like arguing that you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. I'll leave it there, otherwise we'll be talking about privacy for the next 30 minutes.
Well, I did want to follow up just on one more thing, a practical note. The tape over the camera on your laptop, that's a real thing. I gather that's a real thing. I've been told it is. What other things can people do to guard their privacy? Because I tell you, I got tape on the camera on my laptop after seeing this movie. It was like, that's the first thing I did. I went right home and went to the masking tape.
It's really easy. If you use things like a Band-Aid, for example, it's not going to mess up your laptop because it's got sort of the cotton on the other side. And if you just want to use it, you just pull one end of the Band-Aid off and you're fine there. The challenge here, why this matters, right, is that the hardware of our computers, increasingly we don't know what it's actually doing. Maybe there's supposed to be a light there. We don't know what the light's actually working. In some models of computers, the light can be bypassed.
We lost him, but we'll get him back. We'll get him back. Oliver, do you put tape over your laptop camera now?
Yeah. Sure. But it's about, it's encryption too, and it's all various forms of encryption, various companies selling it. And who knows what the enemy is up to. As James Bamford recently wrote, they got quantum computers they're developing now. Pretty fast. So, backdoors. I mean, how can you make a deal with the United States? How could you have a company and actually buy any equipment from this country, or much less submit your equipment to an American sale? There's so many tricks to this thing that way beyond most capacity to understand it.
I think we've got Ed back. I'm sorry. Did you want to finish what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, we could go as far into the sort of these voodoo hacks as we want. That's what I call them, the ones that are really rare, really impressive. But that's not actually the biggest problem for ordinary people. The biggest problem for ordinary people are things like password reuse, where you use one password for all of these different websites. One of those websites happens to get hacked. And of course, the way you log into that website is with your email address. So now they can use that password that they stole from that one site and try to use it to log into all of these other sites. See, oh, does this person have a Facebook account? Oh, does this person have a Gmail account? So there are programs called password managers that you can use to have a unique password for every site, where you only have to remember one password, but each site gets its own. You can use an encrypted communications program for making calls, which now are free and easy to use. They don't cost any money. And it means the typical kind of bulk surveillance, the mass surveillance that we see in the film and it's happening all over the world, not just in the United States. It's important to understand this is a global problem. This is not just about our government. This is about all governments. Are sort of clothed. Right now, your communications, if you're just using your cell phone, picking it up and dialing someone, it travels electronically naked across our communications networks. Encryption is a way of putting sort of clothing on it as it goes across that hostile path, as it goes down the wagon trail. There are a lot of different applications for this. One of the ones that's the best respected right now is called Signal. It's in either of the app stores, and again, it's free, easy to use. And many others, it goes on and on. But the basic idea here is install an ad blocker, use different passwords for different sites. Have an antivirus or some basic program like that. It's not going to help you against the NSA, right? But for most people, the NSA isn't their biggest problem, right? If you want to stop the NSA from spying on you, the best way to do that right now, perhaps the only way we can do that given the disparity of resources, is through the political process. This is something that we're not hearing enough about in this campaign season right now. Nobody's talking about the Constitution. Nobody's talking about their rights. They're only, calling each other names. And I'm not sure that that's what we need right now. We need to be talking about more issues of substance, and the only way that's going to change is if we say something about it.
So we're going to, I'm going to read here a couple of questions from Twitter. We asked if there were any questions that people had for the panel, and here's one of them. This is for Ed from Diamond Galaxy HQ. I'm Alex, and I'm age 15. How can citizens of United Nations countries make privacy a human right?
When we think about this, The first thing we have to do is we have to act locally before we can act globally. We have the most influence on the officials who are closest to us. That may not be much, but it's something. We've got to start within our communities. One of the easy ways to do this is to talk about it, right? If you're in the audience, if you've seen this film, right, and you care about this stuff, you think it's not quite right, you think it should be a little bit different, say something, talk to the people you know. This isn't to say you have to be that guy at, Thanksgiving dinner who ruins everything. But don't be silent. Silence is the biggest weapon that's used against us. We don't want to be weird. We don't want to be different. We don't want to say anything at all. But that is demobilizing. That's the kind of thing that makes people think we don't care. That's the kind of thing that makes government officials think that they can get away with anything. And the other thing to think about, and again, this is just to get back there, is that you don't have to be somebody special to change things, right? When we look at the people who have brought the ball forward, particularly on this issue and many others around the world, they're entirely ordinary people. Whistleblowers are elected by circumstance. It's not about where you went to school, it's not about who you know, it's about what you see. If you see something and you have feelings about it, share them. Try to do something about them. That's not to say, burn your life to the ground and try to be a martyr. We don't need martyrs. What we need are people who care and who say something about it and try to do something in an effective way. Don't destroy your life for nothing. But if you see an opportunity to actually share the reality of what's going on in our world, particularly behind closed doors, recognize that that may be an opportunity to make the world a better place. And
then we have another Twitter question. This is for Oliver. This is from Lauren Ashley 888. If you had to choose one message for people to take away from this film, what would it be?
It's not a takeout restaurant. I really didn't do the film like this. I'm a dramatist. I told the story. It speaks for itself, and you take out what you want. No easy definitions. What do you say, Joe?
Well, Ashley 888. I would sort of echo what Ed was just saying, which is to have a conversation. These are not simple questions, and I know nowadays everything's trying to be reduced to 140 character tweet length, clickbait, headline, and truth is you can't really effectively talk about these things at that length. Because it's more complicated than that. Mm-hmm. That was one of the things I found when I started looking into the Edward Snowden story. Because the truth is, when Oliver first offered me this job, I'll be honest, my response was, okay, wait, Edward Snowden, which one's he? What exactly did he do? I didn't know, because you hear so much news and you never really get any of the details. And it wasn't until Oliver did offer me this job, and I knew I had some learning to do, that I looked into it. And, you Google the name and you hear all these different things, positive and negative, but they're all sort of overly simplified. The internet offers us, well, I should say, the internet can have the pitfall of sort of catering to the short of attention span, but it also offers us the opportunity, if we want to, spend the time and make the effort to really dive into something and really look, learn and read a variety of perspectives, much better than like when I was a kid and you could, if you wanted to learn about something, you could go to the library and maybe get a few books about it. Now you can see everything that's ever been written about something if you want to take the time to read it. I would just say, if there's a message here, just maybe take the time. If you're interested in this, look into it, find out for yourself, and add, as Ed said, start a conversation.
But there's a but here, which is we're talking about privacy, we're talking about surveillance, we're talking about the need to guard our privacy and guard against surveillance, and yet all four of you are on social media. You're on Twitter, you're on Facebook. I mean, I don't do Snapchat and Instagram, you might be on there too. How do you balance the need to be a virtual person, to be in some way accessible to millions of strangers with the desire to protect your privacy? Is there even a way to do that? How do you navigate it?
Well, for me, you know, this question gets asked a lot in interviews because of this film. And I think first off, we have to start looking at privacy beyond just social media. Because oftentimes we think our privacy and our accessibility, we immediately think of Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and those are real things to be conscious about. But it's not reduced to social media. And the thing with social media that I find is, I just joined for the first time earlier this year in like February. I did this whole internet social media world. But I get to choose what I put out. I'm in charge of the content. So I know that when I hit enter on that Twitter button, that information will forever be in the database of the internet, and that information will forever be public. What's so interesting to me, and something that I find more important to be aware of, or equally as important to be aware of, is the information I'm putting on the internet that I am not consciously choosing to make public is now being stored and being kept and accessible to others that I'm not choosing that information to go to.
Right.
So that would be my answer on that.
Well, we have one very important order of business as we close tonight, which is in addition to releasing a new major motion picture, this week is Oliver Stone's birthday. His birthday is tomorrow. And so what I would like you to do is let's count down. We want to do this nationally. Okay, we got 800 theaters, and they're all going to sing Happy Birthday to Oliver. I'm going to count back from 5. Are you ready? Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Oliver. Happy birthday to you.
That's amazing. In all my life, you never dreamed to have a birthday party like this. Wow, my third cake today, but this is the biggest. This is the biggest.
Don't tell people how many pieces you had. It could end up going to the CIA. All right.
A lot more at stake there.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. And thank you to Edward Snowden.